everyone, this is John Fayad, and I'm going to be talking about the stress of being in Science Olympiad. I first want to acknowledge the fact that Science Olympiad is not about just studying and working together with others to win a competition. It's about experiencing fun opportunities with them. My research question is, how does being in Science Olympiad affect a student's mental stress and anxiety at RCSA? And the story behind this relates back to when I was first creating questions, and my first question was related to Science Olympiad. At first, I thought this question was great until later I realized that it did not meet the standards, and I had to revise my question, and this is what I ended up with. I think the reason this question is so important is because I can see students' stress and anxiety, and if that is related to Science Olympiad or not. If it is, that could alter their placements in Science Olympiad tournaments, and it could be detrimental to them in general. My format for this paper starts with my introduction, to my review, to my methods, to my results, and finally to my conclusion. And some background information I think you should know about is what Science Olympiad actually is. Science Olympiad is a school-based program that revolves around science-based events and topics. For example, there are events such as Circuit Lab and Reach for the Stars and astronomy. Astronomy relates to space, and Circuit Lab is related to electricity. All these topics have two students studying them, and these two students will come together at a tournament to take a test together to try to get as many points as they can to come out on top and get first place to move on to the next tournament. The tournaments start with regionals, then state, and then finally national level. Now I want to talk about my most important sources, starting off with academic competitions in science. What are the rewards for students? This study, it talks about different degrees of teacher/parental control on students and if there's too much required participation in Science Olympiad. The authors, Abernathy and Vineyard, use a survey method with a population of 490 people, and I think this is incredibly useful for me because I also use a survey method and I can always relate back to this source. The authors claim that Science Olympiad is a great extracurricular activity which can be both beneficial and detrimental, especially when relating to competitive standards, which might be too much to handle for students. My next source is an analysis of Science Olympiad participants' perceptions regarding their experience with the science and engineering academic competition. The author, Word, uses a survey method with a population of 435 people. Some of the findings include that Science Olympiad helps make it easier to learn more about science-based topics, and what this means is that if you're in Science Olympiad now, it'll be much easier for you later in your life to learn more about science-based topics. And I think the author brings a good look at how Science Olympiad can affect a person's learning capabilities. These sources helped me by justifying my reason for creating this question, by giving me inspiration to relate my question to science and how it could affect students in many different ways. My gap is that no other research paper has done a study about how Science Olympiad affects a student's mental stress and anxiety in River City Science Academy, Jacksonville, Florida. Next slide. Method. My method is going to be an online survey, as I talked about earlier, but I'm going to be using Google Forms. This survey will include both qualitative and quantitative data, such as Likert scale questions and free response questions. I applied this method by giving out my survey to my two groups, my first group being my control, which is my ESP class, Elite Scholars Program, and my experimental group being my Science Olympiad students. I will give out my survey for 3 weeks, and each week I will give out a new survey with the same questions every week. And I hope I will capture the stress and anxiety of students if there will be an upcoming tournament, which I think is in February. And the reason the survey was best for my research was because it was easy to distribute amongst both of my groups, and I still get a good set of answers from both of the qualitative and quantitative questions. I can also easily analyze my data. And since my survey is online survey in Google Forms, it would make it much easier to obtain my data and share my survey with everyone in Science Olympiad and my control group. And a Likert scale question is an example of like how much does this hurt on a scale of 1 to 5. And that's why the survey is a better choice for my research, because interviews would also be much harder to do, especially due to COVID-19 right now and our situation. And that's why I think survey is really useful right now. And finally, my procedure. I started by enacting my method and figuring out what questions I needed to put in my survey. After I finished that, I had to check with my teacher to make sure that my survey was still ethical. And after I got that approved, I created a consent form. After I sent my consent forms to all my students, both in ESP and in Science Olympiad, and after I got them back, I knew who would be participating, and so I could start distributing my survey to my students. And after I get my results, after every week, I surveyed them again for 3 weeks, doing the same thing. And once I got my results overall, I analyzed both groups to see which is more stretch and how to figure out how Science Olympiad affected students' stresses and anxiety. Finally, I gathered all my data and made a section in my paper to explain all of this data using graphs and paragraphs. And my questions will consist of Likert scale questions, and I explained that, and some for open-ended and free response. I also used graphs and paragraphs to sum up my data in my paper. And that is all. That is everything that you need to know right now. Thank you guys for watching.